Welcome into this Big Ten today. Great to have you with us on this Tuesday. Dave Revson, Dave Wanstedt, Joshua Perry. Guys, a few things have happened since you were here last.
Yeah,
That's
crazy.
A lot of things, yep. Some tough things. I mean, anytime you get into the coaching realm, I mean, it's difficult enough being in it for 40 years myself, but, you know, I'm still a fan of Scott Frost. I really can't, you know, I followed him close when he was at Central Florida. You know, to take that program, that doesn't happen by accident, from no wins to 12 wins. And it's sadly, I don't think it was as much the X and O stuff as a lot of the other things that contribute just as much to winning, you know?
Well, we'll dive into that. It is obviously our big story today, the aftermath and the fallout continuing in Lincoln as we check out our big story. As you're clearly aware by now, Frost is out. Incredibly disappointing run at his alma mater. Just 16-31, no wins against ranked teams. A staggering 5-22 in one-possession games. Another former Husker quarterback, wide receivers coach Mickey Joseph, takes over as the interim head coach, and we'll dive into the task ahead for Joseph in a bit. Coach, you started to touch on it. I'm interested in diving in a little bit with you guys. Maybe, Joshua, you could start it. What went wrong here? Like, why do you think this not only didn't work out, but didn't work out in such a dramatic and overwhelming sort of way?
It's difficult when you start to evaluate it. And the place that I feel like we've started a lot of these conversations about Nebraska has never been about recruiting. It's never been about stacking up talent, because they've had really good players throughout Scott Frost's tenure. And it really wasn't about being overmatched at all and not having a chance to actually win football games, because a lot of the losses were extremely close losses, what everybody talks about. I think it comes down to the organization, the detail of how they played football. When you start to look at turnovers, when you start to look at penalties, when you start to look at special teams errors, which were there throughout his tenure, that's what made the difference right there. And so whether or not you're a coach who can deal with the X's and O's and you can bring in talent, I think it takes the next step of figuring out what exactly the detail things are that you need to do, and then how you can ultimately communicate that with your players. So I think the hardest part about evaluating this is that Nebraska was so close in so many instances and just never got it to click the way that they wanted to. And now we're sitting here after 2 full weeks of football games, and there's a vacancy over there in Nebraska.
Yeah, I've been on both sides of this. And what I would tell Scott right now, Scott, sometimes you really look back and you believe you've done everything that you can possibly do. It didn't work out, okay? You're a good football coach. People, I believe, around the league respect you on all levels. Get out of town, okay? Let me tell you something, because everything, and I know that Mickey Joseph, he's a Nebraska guy like you are, Scott, like you were, but everything that the new coach does now is going to be better. That's just the way it works. Yeah. All of a sudden, we're going to be more coach-friendly. We're going to be we're not going to practice as hard. When I left the Bears, players were carrying golf clubs to training camp. They said, where are you going with those clubs? They said, well, this is the way it should be. When we get an off day, we're playing golf. Well, I didn't believe in that. You know, when it was time for business, it was business. So everything is going to be better. You know, get away from it, get out of town, regroup. You'll bounce back somewhere else. Maybe not a head coach on a different level. Who knows? But you're a good football coach. Just don't lose your confidence. That would be my advice from someone who's been on both sides of it.
Yeah, it's really hard. You think of how disruptive it is to families. And, I mean, that part of it, I do think, look, it is a business where people are paid an immense amount of money. I mean, we know the numbers, right? I mean, Scott Frost got $15 million in addition to all the money.
I didn't get that's the difference.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's a whole different world, right? No, I understand. But I'm just saying, like, you know, I know there are a lot of people out there who are saying, you know, cry me a river or whatever, but it is disruptive. It's on some levels, I would have to think, embarrassing, right? I mean, it's your pride.
Well, you come back to the place that you played, too.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's
right?
the other part about it, too.
Son
and everybody thought that this was going to work. I don't think anybody would have predicted that this would be the outcome of Scott Frost back at Nebraska. And that's the other part of why this hurts so much mentally for him, is like the table was set, everything was supposed to work out. it went the exact opposite way we all anticipated, and that's difficult to deal with.
Yeah, my feelings here, be honest, it was my kids, in school, and your wife going to the grocery store, getting their hair done. No one may say anything to their face, but you're hearing it. And if you get to the point, truly, where Scott says, I did everything I could. It hasn't worked. I don't know why. Let me go. Let me go. Let's move on this thing. So it's a tough deal.
It just ended up feeling like the snowball rolling downhill, right? That there was just no way to stop it. And it does seem crazy because certainly the stats tell you, kind of the analytics tell you that in this world, close games even out, right? And so it's all often a good measure of who might be the teams who had a bad year a year ago, who might have a better year this year, who lost the close games, and then vice versa, who won some games maybe that you wouldn't expect them to win. It's an anomaly where you find a coach who can outperform the close games year in and year out. And on the flip side, it's an anomaly when you find a coach who loses the overwhelming majority of those. It's very unusual. And so you just kept thinking, this will turn around. But it didn't turn around. And Joshua, as you said, it was the exact same stuff, right?
Yes.
Like they've never had a positive turnover ratio under Scott Frost, not one time.
No. Mickey being on the staff, he's in a tough situation. Being a Nebraska guy,
yes,
but he's got to find a way to get his players energized and get them focused and just get them to play as hard as you can this week against Oklahoma, which is going to be a huge step.
Yeah, let's get into Mickey Joseph and the challenge ahead for him. Again, another former Husker quarterback. Again, they start, as you said, Wani, against Oklahoma. Good luck with that one, number 6 team in the country. Then a stretch that certainly looked manageable at the beginning of the year. Indiana, Rutgers, Purdue, Illinois. They do have Michigan still among their crossovers as well. They finish up in Iowa City on Black Friday. What's the challenge, and then what's kind of the fair expectation? I'm interested in hearing both of those things from you
Something's got to change. I mean, I've been on that side, too, where I've taken over. Something's got to change, or the players, or you can't have the same message, and you can't do the exact same things. He's got to change some things. That's why I told Scott, get out of town, because all of a sudden they may cut down practice, or they may do more walkthroughs, or they're going to adjust some things. We're not going to run this as much, but we're going to do more of this. Things like that, little things that the players have to see some type of change to get their attention, in my opinion. But he's in a tough bind because obviously he's had loyalty, to Scott. So you got to find that in between to get the players' attention and make sure that you do everything you can to give yourself a chance to win.
I think it's about the players as well. Like walking in that door, you meet with them for the first time. One of the things I would have had queued up is a highlight tape of all the things that they have done well over the last handful of years and said, this is what the majority of this team has been outside of a handful of mistakes that have lost us games. And so if we can get over that and we can correct those things, and you talk about what needs to be corrected, I think that helps a lot. But then you also give them the realistic outlook on what the rest of their season is. Of course, Oklahoma is going to be a difficult game, and we all acknowledge that. But as you look at the Big Ten slate right now, look around the West, ask the question, who do you think has more raw talent on their roster than Nebraska right now? And it'd be hard to make an argument about some of the other teams out there. Wisconsin's down, Iowa's down. We don't know what Illinois is quite yet. You've got Purdue and Minnesota, of course, that we feel pretty good about. Season ain't over. You have one conference loss, but if you can stop the bleeding and start to get things turned around just from a mental perspective, there's still a ton to play for, and I would make sure to emphasize that as well. We're not throwing the season away. We got to go out here and win some games.
I think that's where it's so tough is when we're at camp. I mean, there is talent there. I mean, the talent has evidenced itself in games. I mean, there have been moments throughout the entire course of Scott's tenure, Coach, where you look at this team and say, man, they've got some pretty good players.
Yeah, the opening, 16 portals. They brought in more players, and some quality, talented guys from all over the country. They wanted to come to Nebraska, for a reason. They were convinced they were going to win. So, just like Josh said, I mean, there's talent there. You got to do it. I'll be curious to see what changes Mickey makes. And I say this kind of in jest, because you see it. When this happens, all of a sudden the dress code is a little more relaxed with the team traveling. Or they give them a a little more ice cream.
Sure, the food's better.
The food, all of a sudden, man, we're having steak. I mean, things happen that we're not aware of. That the coach is trying to do something to get the key turned.
Well, getting to 6 wins, I think, would be a huge accomplishment for them. They've gone 5 straight seasons without making a bowl game, which is hard to fathom. At Nebraska, it's actually the longest streak currently in the Big Ten, and longest streak at that school in about 60 years. So that one big story I want to get your guys' take on. The other big one, of course, is J.J. McCarthy is officially in as the starter at Michigan. He has been virtually flawless this year. He's 15 of 16 through the air. He's averaging better than 16 yards per carry. It has all come against subpar opposition, but you certainly understand why he was seen as a top 25 recruit coming out of high school. Joshua, based on the performance on the field, this almost became a no-brainer decision, if it was a decision.
It was a no-brainer. We all watched what happened out there, and I asked Wani this question earlier today just to see where he was at, and we're in agreement here. After watching J.J. McCarthy against Hawaii, I learned nothing about that young man, and I mean that in the most complimentary way, because you are a five-star recruit. You're coming off of a team that made it to the college football playoff. If we're talking about Alabama or Clemson or Georgia or Ohio State, and they've got that same situation, we expect their quarterback to be able to go out there and make all the plays just the way that he did, to be efficient, to have command of the offense, to be confident. Now, in saying that, there were two plays that really stood out to me. There was one play in the red zone, had to throw a dart, absolutely on target. Another play rolling out to his left, had to put it on the sideline. Those were really good plays, but outside of that, I think we're going to learn more about J.J. McCarthy when he's in that 3rd and 10 situation in a tight matchup and that gotta-have-it type of play. But from what we've seen right here, at least for my expectations of what he could be and what this offense would look like, how opened up it is, he answered the bell. He looked phenomenal. Now I just want to see more in those crunch situations from him.
Yeah, I totally agree, like you said. But if I'm Jim, all I would say is, we used to say this in the NFL. The minute that you put a guy on waivers, okay, you make a change, you better be ready to have that player gone. In other words, don't put a player on waivers and move him back and say, well, we'll put him out there on waivers and we'll sign him back. If you make that decision, you better be prepared to lose that player. So I would assume that Jim has thought this through. If I take this step and he's going to be the starter, Cade's not going to be here. Cade's too good a player.
Right.
He's going someplace. You better have thought that thing through, because that's probably the way it's going to go.
And the tough situation is part of this, what happens to Cade is also out of Jim Harbaugh's control, because you put him in the game and the reaction from the fans isn't what you would want it to be for a guy who beat Ohio State and won a Big Ten championship and got you to the college football playoff. And just from a player's perspective, I don't know how I would feel receiving that. And it's a very difficult spot to be in. So I'm with you on that. Like, this had to be well thought through. And obviously we see what J.J. McCarthy is doing, and he's going to continue to improve, and you hope that he stays healthy throughout the season. But Cade McNamara right now is going to be a huge question mark. And everybody says that he's a team player. He was voted a captain. He's a great kid, and I understand that. But there's a human element that's involved in it too, where nobody likes to be the second place guy, and that's a tough spot.
I think that's what's strange about it to me, just that McNamara really didn't play well when he came out, right? I mean, it seemed like that pressure got to him, and he has been so unflappable during his career, and as he talked about during his journey, he's kind of been doubted at every step of the way, and it just feels like his confidence got sapped, because I expected that if McCarthy took the job, it would be because of what he did.
Right.
But that it wouldn't be so clear-cut. But, I mean, McNamara's 54% completion. He dodged a bullet
pressure.
on one interception. He threw another one.
I mean, just the psyche, like that, the aspect of having all of the pressure. You're the guy who gets the first start, so you got to go out there and set the bar. Maybe you felt like you were in pretty good control of the battle, and now all of a sudden it's still a battle. That's a hard thing to deal with as a player. And, not to go all off the rails here, but this is also a good moment to, if you're Cade McNamara, what are you doing to take care of yourself as well? Like, I think that this is an opportunity to talk to somebody maybe outside of the program about how you balance all these things, because he certainly didn't look like himself, and every athlete goes through that.
Even without saying a word, you can feel that as a player and as a coach. You know what I mean? It's human nature that I'm sure he felt the added stress and added pressure from day one coming out of training camp.
Right, and I mean, I don't pretend to be some body language expert, but I think you could see it on the field. You certainly can see it in the post-game interviews, right?
That guy was last year was as confident
totally
as can
different.
be.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I know. So look, again, it's clear J.J. McCarthy, from what we've seen, should be the guy.
Yes.
But you may, particularly with the way that he plays, he's going to run the ball. You may still need McNamara down the line. So that part of it is really interesting as well. More than half of the Big Ten still undefeated as we roll into week 3. It includes many of the usual suspects, also a couple of moderate surprises. Indiana's already equaled last year's win total as a conference victory. Rutgers got an impressive road win over BC. Let's dive into some of these teams. And Wani, I want to start with you and Penn State. They had to go on the road in their opener, got a win at Purdue, had a tremendous drive to win the game, then came home, beat Ohio U pretty handily. What has stood out to you about the Nittany Lions so far?
Well, the thing is stood out to me is the play of Sean Clifford. I mean, the guy I think is really playing good from a standpoint of completion percentages. You know, when he has to move the ball to get points, he's been able to make plays. The defense is young. We knew they were going to be young. You know, the thing that concerns me a little bit is, yes, they had a bunch of huge plays last week. What? I mean, 8 plays over 20 yards. I mean, that's unheard of. Half their yardage came off of 4 runs with Nicholas Singleton. That reminds me a little bit of the Penn State team, you know, when Saquon Barkley was there, and I was at that game, Ohio State, and they had the game won at the end if they could have made a first down. And they had the lead, and they couldn't punch and make those tough yards. That's what I want to see out of Penn State. I mean, against Ohio University, how do you give up 5 sacks and have 8 tackles for losses? I mean, that's what Ohio University had against them. So, you know, my focus is on, I think, and that's how you get your defense better too. You rest them a little bit. You know, you run the ball. So that offensive line, and I know we sound like we're beating the same drum, but that is my focus on Penn State, whether they are a good team or have a chance to be a real contender. Can that offensive line come together and not give up sacks and not give up tackles for losses? That's, to me, the difference.
That would continue to be the question for me as well. I look at this team, and I like the pieces just about everywhere else. Sean Clifford, I know some people maybe want to see more out of his top end. I think he's doing fine. He is a great leader. The guys trust him. Wide receiver is great. Running back's great. I like the defense and where it can be toward the end of the year. It's that offensive line.
Yep.
Head to Auburn this week. Amazingly, it's the first time Auburn has ever hosted a Big Ten team.
And they're and Penn State's favorite.
You would have thought, though, that sometime like in the 20s, someone would have taken the train down there.
They're taking the old train.
Played Auburn.
That'd be an old train down there.
That would have been an old train. Yeah, well, it's the 20s. It'd be a really old train now. Joshua, we really liked Minnesota in camp. They've been very impressive so far. They have not played anyone worthy of, you know, a big-time opponent. You know, they haven't played anyone.
Yeah.
Is really what I'm trying to say, awkwardly, I might add. But still, I know you like this team. I like this team in camp. What do you think?
They've handled business the way that they're supposed to. I mean, we just talked about J.J. McCarthy going out there against an overmatched opponent, and it's the same thing with Minnesota right now. Offensively, defensively, special teams has been really good. You look at the defense, they've been strong in the pass game and in the run game, and that's exactly what we thought that they could do this year. I'd like to maybe see some more negative plays created by the defense in terms of sacks and TFLs, but I think they can grow into that as the year goes on. As you look at their offense, they're pretty much balanced in output. They're 280 passing yards a game, 300 rushing on the ground. Of course, they like to run it a little bit more, but what happens there is they have taken really good advantage of the opportunities in the RPO game. We always talk about them running the slant or running the dig, and they've been hitting it pretty consistently. And so this is exactly what I thought this team would be. They've handled business up to this point, and now it's about a growth and continuation pattern. Now, the game that I'll be looking out for is when they go to East Lansing in a couple of weeks. I think that'll tell us a lot about this Minnesota team, but I like what I've seen so far.
Not going to learn a ton this week against Colorado. May very well be the worst team in Power 5 football.
But they may put them. They may put them in a few situations which they haven't been in. You know, what I mean, where they're backed up, and who knows? I mean, 2-minute drill, they have to score. I mean, this is what's missing, in my opinion, on that team. They haven't had their backs against the wall in certain situations yet.
Presumably better than Western Illinois and New Mexico State. So you would think it will be a somewhat sterner test. Illinois does have a loss, as we know, to Indiana, but man, the other 2 games they played really well. I mean, they played a Power 5 opponent and dominated them in Virginia this week. What do you think of the Illini?
I love the Illini. I truly do. I believe, other than Minnesota, I think that this is the second best team in the West. And I think that, you know, when you look at what they're doing, we talked a little bit about this last week. I mean, their defense is playing better than I ever thought they could be.
Yeah.
I mean, they're creating turnovers. They're coming up with tackles for losses. I mean, they're keeping their offense in the game, because I really thought the way they've turned the ball over on offense that they were going to be -10 in turnovers. I think they're maybe -1 because the defense has gotten it for them. But they're doing the things you have to do to win X and O wise, running the ball. Tommy DeVito's playing efficient. I mean, and they're playing good defense. That will give you a chance. But the turnovers at the end of the game, I mean, Brett's got to get that corrected. And you hate to say this, but the quickest way, what do you do with the guy that keeps committing turnovers? He can't play for you.
Hey, come sit next to me.
Come sit next to me and Josh right here. And we'll try to get you squared away. But really, that will come back. That will lose your game. That's what lost the Indiana game for them. We all know that.
It's shocking that they've had the turnover issues and some of the penalties because of how well coached I think that they are in practice, just from watching how Brett Bielema goes about his job. So that's going to be the biggest thing for them to clean up. I don't disagree with you. Illinois is still a little bit of a question mark, but they can make a run in the West.
This defense, really good.
Yeah,
I mean, they've given up 9 points in 2 home games, 3 points against Virginia, fewest against a Power 5 foe since 2000. I mean, they're good. Ryan Walters.
And the last pointer, the style of offense that they use too. If you're a wide open offense and you're spread, the turnovers, you kind of say, okay, here they come.
Yeah.
But with this offense, playing it close to the vest and running the ball, I mean, you should be better in the turnover margin.
Yeah, absolutely. What about Michigan State? It's interesting to me, Joshua. I just feel like, I don't know how they can be under the radar because of what a great season they had last year, but this is the dilemma that you face when you're in a division with Ohio State and Michigan, and they are both in the top 4 in the country, and they're getting all kinds of attention. It feels in a strange sort of way like people just aren't paying a ton of attention to Michigan State yet, and they're kind of in the prove-it-to-me mode. Well, we'll see how you do when you face Michigan or Ohio State. Where are the Spartans in your mind right now?
I want to see more. It's still kind of prove it to me. But I think this is exactly what Mel Tucker likes. I think this is where he wants to be, because you can fly under the radar and you can challenge your team with that as well. And I know his guys have historically responded. You look at the run game, that was going to be the biggest question. Berger's done a really good job there. I think the offensive line has created some lanes for him. You want more out of Peyton Thorne as a veteran quarterback. He's turned the football over entirely too much. His completion percentage isn't where you want it to be. I believe it's under 60% right now. So I think that's going to be a big storyline that you want to see the development from. But defensively is really where I asked the question. I did this last year. They are so good at creating negative plays.
Yeah.
Sacks, TFLs. They create so much havoc. Has their secondary been tested yet, and have they faced an offensive line that could maybe cool down that defensive front? And I'm going to learn a lot more about this team when they get into that situation, just like we did last year. So that's why I'm in wait-and-see mode. No doubt they've got the pieces. No doubt they've got the talent, but they still need to grow into this season.
Yeah, my only thought is I want to see, as every team is, when you're down by 5 with 3 minutes to go, can Peyton Thorne take him down the field, throw in the ball, and win a game for you? Right. That's my question mark on Michigan.
To your point, they'll lead the nation in sacks. I mean, I know it's early. Lead the Big Ten in tackles for loss. Yeah. This is a really good test. Washington's a good test. I mean, it's just hard to go out west and play, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, they've lost 12 straight road games against the Pac-12. They haven't won one since 1957. I mean, it's just hard to do no matter how good you are. And Washington's pretty good. Michael Penix chucking all over the place.
They got some guys familiar with the Big Ten.
Yes, they do. I want a surprising loss for Wisconsin against Washington State. They came from the West Coast and won in the Midwest. What do you make of Paul Chryst' team and the mistakes that they made this past week?
That's the key, Rever. I think you just said it. I mean, what they did from possession of the ball, 38 minutes.
Right.
Running the ball, that's what they're going to do. Play defense, they're going to play great defense. Jim Leonard's got that young defense, losing 8 guys. I mean, I think they're doing a great job. But the mistakes are the things that are kind of foreign to me, and they kind of got me on my heels a little bit right now. I mean, think about their last 4 drives against Washington State. Punt, missed field goal, interception, fumble. I mean, you got no chance against better people to do that. And we talked earlier, you can mention it, Washington State, we say copycat league.
Yep.
Well, what they did defensively against Wisconsin's offense, right? Don't you agree? That's what teams are going to see every week.
I think it's a blueprint now. Washington State, basically, they played man-to-man the whole game. They said we're going to get a man advantage in the box, especially since Graham Mertz is not a runner, and then we're going to play tight single coverage on the outside and see if you can't beat us over the top. And Wisconsin certainly did rack up some yards, but Washington State basically made a decision that they weren't going to be able to consistently drive it down the field, finish off drives. And you mentioned the turnovers, you mentioned some of the punts, you miss a field goal. Obviously that hurts you, but I think a lot of teams are going to try to do the same thing, is make you play left-handed, see if those wide receivers can really break open in the back end. Can you block all of our guys if we really start to get aggressive when you want to drop back and pass it? And I think they got some challenges offensively to try to handle that.
And then more than 100 yards in penalties, too. I mean, that's a good way to do yourself in.
Great point. 11 penalties and the 3 turnovers. Everything happened in the second half. That bothers me. That now, where's your focus? Where's your energy to win games in the fourth quarter? It's not there right now.
Don't want to be alarmist, but they've lost 8 of their last 20 games. Yeah. It's not crazy. It's not horrible, but it's not the standard that you would expect from Wisconsin. Iowa, I feel like we're kind of beating the dead horse here. I think this is a huge week for them against Nevada. I mean, this is a team that gave up more than 60 points, I think, to Incarnate Word. And Incarnate Word's this crazy offense. For those who don't know about them, they're going to chuck it all over the place. The quarterback from Wazoo actually came from there last year. But if you can't score some points against Nevada, Joshua, you're really in trouble.
Yeah, you've given up 13 points on the season. That's a thumbs up. You've only scored 14. That's a thumbs down. And part of it is that you only had 1 touchdown on the season so far, and you got it when you started the drive on 16-yard line going in. There are so many questions about how you try to improve this offense, and they're challenged on the offensive line. They're challenged out on the edges. Quarterback's a big question. They can't run the ball like we've seen them historically do. And it's too hard to ask your defense and your special teams to go out there and win you games. And I wish I could come up with a solution. Like, I've thought this over and over in my head. Do you try to maybe spread it out a little bit and dink and dunk and create some high percentage throws? I don't know, but it's got to be something different than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, but when your quarterback's throwing more interceptions than he is touchdowns, you got a problem.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened the last several games.
When you have more punts than points, you have a serious problem.
You got a more serious
That's where they are. 16 punts, 14 points on the season. Yeah, that's not a great formula for success. The portal magic continues in East Lansing. How about the UNLV transfer? Jacoby Windman, the highest graded defender in the Power 5, according to Pro Football Focus, has been an absolute force. He leads the nation in both sacks and forced fumbles just 2 games into his Spartan career. We wanted to focus on some individual players, and he is a really good place to start, Waddy. He's been phenomenal.
You mentioned sacks and forced fumbles. You can add tackles for losses. I mean, all 3 of those categories, he's leading the nation right now. And I think the interesting story behind Jacoby is that when he transfers to Michigan State from UNLV, Mel Tucker, he was a linebacker. He was a linebacker at UNLV. And Mel Tucker moves him to the defensive line, defensive end, and he hires a pass rush specialist. Help me out here, Brandon Jordan. And all of a sudden, you're seeing these type of results. So, I mean, I think you got to give Mel Tucker a little bit of credit, and obviously Brandon Jordan, who's working with him on a daily basis. I mean, because they figured that he could be a lot more productive rushing that passer than he could be off the line at linebacker.
That's the biggest thing, is the technique and the coaching, because the forced fumbles are a result of that. I think that's a high awareness type of play, to always be thinking about the football instead of just trying to get a sack or trying to get a TFL. So I'm with you right there.
And to your point from earlier, it helps your secondary, right? They haven't given up a pass longer than 22 yards yet. We'll see if that continues. I'd be very surprised if they don't this week against a really good offense. But that's one way to make up for the problems that you had on the back end a year ago. Joshua, you've talked a lot, and we all have. Wanda, you were mentioning earlier the run game at Penn State and the offensive line issues in particular. We've kind of gone back and forth about how much of this is about the line, how much of it is about the backs. It feels like they've settled the back issue with Singleton.
Yes, and you talked about Saquon Barkley earlier, and I'm not here to say that Nicholas Singleton is Saquon Barkley, but he's going to have to play like that. One of the things that Saquon did extremely well was he made a lot of something out of nothing. many times where he was bottled up at the line of scrimmage, that offensive line couldn't open up holes and get people off of the ball. And what we saw from Singleton in the game that they played last week, very explosive runs. Maybe we thought it could be a 2 or 3 yarder. He turns on the jets, and now he's out the gates. That is what this offense is going to have to rely on from the running back position until that offensive line can get better. And I'm not certain that an offensive line can take drastic strides during the season. So it'll be imperative for him to continue to find ways to create. You have to be physical, of course, taking care of the football. But if they can get performance after performance where, this guy, all of a sudden you think he's bottled up, and next thing you know, he's squirting down the field, like that's really good football.
10 carries, 179 yards for him. You mentioned the 3 runs longer than 40 yards for a program that hadn't had a 100-yard rusher in 17 games. So it is significant for them, no doubt. Minnesota, no issue with 100-yard rushers. They had 5 different guys go over 100 yards last year. The issue was the pass game, and it was very clear in the Western Illinois game, again, against an overmatched team. They made a concerted effort to throw the ball. They threw for nearly 400 yards. Tanner Morgan, I know, really stood out to you.
He did, and I think you got to give some credit, obviously, to P.J. Fleck. They brought back offensive coordinator, quarterback coach Kurt Soraka. I think he's made a difference with Tanner. And let's look at the improvement, because everyone says, oh, Tanner Morgan's playing good. He's been around forever. But, I mean, for the last 2 years, he was completing about 60% of his passes. Now it's 73. I mean, now he's throwing for 230-some yards. He was throwing for 200 or less in the past. So he has improved his accuracy, he's improved his decision-making, and he's improved his play. So let's give him some credit for becoming a better football player.
Yeah, he's confident, he's efficient, and he's in an offense that creates high-percentage throws, and that certainly helps him. We've seen him have success doing the same thing a few years ago.
They have outgained their first 2 opponents by 879 combined yards.
It's a lot of yards.
Seems like that's what they've outgained them by.
A lot of confidence.
It does seem like a lot. Again, the level of difficulty has not been the most challenging. Another quarterback putting up huge numbers, Joshua Tagovailoa.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about C.J. Stroud, Naden O'Connell. We talk about J.J. McCarthy, just spent time on Tanner Morgan. But Tagovailoa has quietly started off really well for Maryland. 78% completion. That is a ridiculous number. The thing that you worry about, 4 touchdowns, a couple of interceptions, it's always been the can you take care of the ball and make the great decision when you need to. And I think he can still improve that. And one thing that's going to help him is when he makes a concerted effort to just pull the football down and run it, because he's got elite movement skills, and that's a part of why he's able to extend some of these plays and find open guys. But I think that's the next step in his game. I love everything that he does. I love the way that he competes out there on the football field, and now it's just about how do we continue to make sure that we put great things on tape and take care of the football.
They are a big strike offense, 7 touchdown drives of less than 2 minutes so far this year. Another offense that can strike in a hurry is Purdue's, and they mined the transfer portal and got a fabulous player in Charlie Jones. It is staggering. We talked about this a lot on Saturday. His 21 catches, that equaled his total from all of last year, Wani. And he did it in 6 quarters. He didn't play in the second half.
That is incredible. And my man Chuck Sizzle Jones.
Chuck Sizzle, yeah.
As Gus
likes
Johnson.
to call him,
as Gus likes to call him.
Sizzle.
He's got a nickname now. But you're right. I mean, so is it the style of offense? Sure. But, I mean, again, let's give the player, give the kid a little bit of credit for him improving his skills. It's hard to believe that he's already duplicated touchdowns from a year ago, right? And catches from a year ago.
Yeah.
So, he's going to be the major part. I mean, everybody was talking about who was going to take David Bell's place on Purdue's team. Well, I think we're looking at him and we're talking about him right now.
He had 6 touchdown catches in his career, 36 games coming into this year. He's got 4 in the first 2 games. Pretty amazing. Wisconsin, the offense scuffled quite a bit, as we've already talked about, against Washington State. The defense, by and large, played well. Nick Herbig continues to be the leader in that group.
He's a guy that I enjoy watching thoroughly because he's a little bit of a nutcase out there, plays with reckless abandon.
He's a nutcase a little bit off.
Well, he is too.
By the way, yeah.
He's great.
Fun kid.
Great to be around. It's awesome.
Absolutely.
But watching him go out there with the same approach every day, I think is what stands out to me. Is that he's going to play assignment sound football. He's going to set hard edges. He's going to live in the backfield. He's going to get sacks on the quarterback. He's right there behind Windman, just in terms of those negative plays that he's been able to create. And I think this team right now needs to rely on that type of mentality defensively, and it's permeated through. to have success until this offense comes up to speed. But just everything about his game is fun for me to watch.
Yeah, he is a really, really fun player. As we said, both on and off the field, has a tremendous personality. This is a get-right game for them, New Mexico State, because they got Ohio State looming the week after, and that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'll be a tough one. 6 Big Ten teams in the top 11 in the nation in the latest volleyball poll. The conference also has 7 of the top 25, with 2 more teams receiving votes. Just an incredible conference, as it has been for years, and you can see one of the best teams in that conference tonight on the Big Ten Network. A can't-miss top 10 volleyball matchup. Maddie Kubik and the second-ranked Huskers taking on Stanford. It is women's volleyball powered by Unleaded 88 tonight, 8 Eastern on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Back to football and time for our big stat, which highlights the big difference so far between the Big Ten East and the Big Ten West. 7 teams in the East are all undefeated. 4 of them are ranked. Minnesota, the only team in the West that has yet to lose, and none of the West teams are in the top 25 after Wisconsin dropped out this week. Joshua, is this an early season anomaly, or is the East that much better top to bottom than the West?
I mean, I felt coming in that the West was going to be wide open. There was going to be a lot of parity between those teams, maybe a step behind some of the teams in the East. And I think that's basically what we've seen so far. We had expectations for Ohio State and Michigan State. Thought Penn State could get a little bit better. Maybe Indiana last year was an anomaly. We know that they're better than 2 wins for sure. So I think we kind of saw that. And, of course, Maryland kind of looming there. People don't talk about them enough. I think they've got a talented roster. And Rutgers, of course, a well-coached team. And then you look over at the West, and it almost felt like coming into this year, Wisconsin might not be the odds-on favorite like a lot of the media thought. Iowa was going to have some troubles. We talked about that. Purdue and Minnesota taking a step forward. Illinois is a team that's building a culture and starting to get a lot of momentum going. And then Nebraska was going to be the question mark. So this is what I anticipated, I think, for the Big Ten Conference to look like. I think it's staggering that Minnesota is the only team in the West at this point that has not been beaten. That is kind of shocking to me. But overall, I thought the East was going to be more top-heavy than the West for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with the initial statement, and then I looked at it a little bit differently. I mean, the teams in the West have played twice as many Power 5 teams. So we look at their record and we say, okay, well, they're 9-7, they're not undefeated. Well, I mean, overall, the West side of our, twice as many Power 5 teams. So you got to take that into consideration. And then the other thing, too, I look at quarterbacks. I say quarterbacks with experience that have had success. Mm-hmm. And who's, C.J. Stroud comes to mind. Sean Clifford comes to mind.
Right.
I think Tua could be, right now, people are talking about him nationally. So, hey, Tanner Morgan is the guy in the West that everybody's talking about, and rightfully so. But I think the East, because of who they played, wasn't as strong as the West. And I think the quarterback play might be, at this point, stronger in the East than what it is in the West.
And again, this is the history. I mean, as we know, the West has never won the Big Ten championship game. If you take Ohio State's 18-2 mark out of the crossovers are actually fairly even through the years. So, I mean, that does distort it a little bit. A lot of this has been just how good Ohio State's been through the years, right? And that's kind of thrown it off. But it does feel a little bit different this year. You certainly have the most competitive teams, the teams that feel like they can compete for the college football playoff, all seem to be in the East. How do you assess the East race at this point? Is it, as we alluded to earlier, Ohio State and Michigan and everyone else, or does Penn State have a say in who ends up winning this thing?
I think it's Ohio State and Michigan squarely at the top, and I think that Michigan is a better finished product right now than Ohio State is currently, although I think Ohio State has a better top end when they do hit that point later on in the season than Michigan would. I look at Michigan State as a team, again, with question marks, but I love their head coach, and I think that they have the amount of talent it's going to take to compete. Penn State's a little bit more of a question to me. You've got a veteran quarterback who we know what he is. The offensive line is trouble, like what they can do defensively. So that's how I would kind of tear it off, and then the rest of the teams fall into place. But I mentioned Maryland earlier. I don't know if they're getting enough credit.
Yeah,
I think they can make a lot of noise.
I agree. I'm anxious to see Maryland. I mean, I truly am. I just think that we haven't talked about them enough because they haven't had the games yet. But it's coming up. But I'll tell you what, The one thing I like Ohio State, even though one, because I think they have a little bit more talent. The changes that they made with the defensive coordinator, I think, is going to pay dividends down the road. And, hey, what did Ryan say? Why were they happy with the Notre Dame win? They're physical.
Yes. Right.
You know who he's talking about? Michigan.
Who's the best team in the West?
Minnesota. I mean, and I say that because they are doing, they're just not talented. People aren't talking. They're doing the things. I'd love to say Illinois or Wisconsin or Purdue or Northwestern, but they are doing the things that they have to do X and O wise, and they're not committing those dumb mistakes, the turnovers and the penalties. They've been pretty darn clean in all areas.
If Purdue eats up some clock on that Thursday night in week 1, it might be a different conversation on them right now.
We're probably slighting them a lot.
I think Minnesota is great. I think Purdue can be right there with them.
That's the issue for Purdue, right? Is you already have this conference loss hanging over you. And Minnesota, remember, does not have to play Ohio State, does not have to play Michigan.
Yeah.
So it's a
good
favorable crossover year for them. Week 3 in the Big Ten, 13 teams in action. We have 4 on the Big Ten Network. Northwestern and Indiana coming up in the early window. Wisconsin in the mid-afternoon. Iowa in prime time. 5 Big Ten teams facing Power 5 foes. Nebraska, Purdue, Penn State, Minnesota, and Michigan State. Wanda, you get to go first. Game you're most interested in seeing is?
Well, I'm going to talk about Iowa, and I'm going to talk about them playing Nevada, because this is going to be a game where Nevada right now has the best turnover margin in the country. So what does that tell you? That tells you that Iowa's going to have to protect the football. They're going to have to throw it some and improve their passing game. I mean, if they don't improve their passing game today or this weekend they're not going to. They're not going to improve it against Wisconsin or Minnesota. So this is the week where I think they're going to have to open it up more. The other side of the coin is, hey, you got a team that's very, very ball hawkish coming after the ball. So I think it's going to be a good challenge for them. Can they get the points going and still protect the football? That's the key to Iowa.
Is it Petrus? Is it Padilla? I think that's going to be a huge question mark as well. What's the first one that jumps off the page at you, Joshua?
Michigan State traveling west. We got Washington, and I've done that trip before. When I was playing at Ohio State, we played at Berkeley, and that was it's crazy. The time difference, you have to make sure you're hydrating. You lose time on prep because of all the travel, so you need to make sure you take care of all those things. But I mentioned Michigan State's defense against an offense that can challenge their secondary. You talked about Michael Penix Jr. earlier. He can certainly do that. Washington has wide receivers. I think they're 3rd in the nation right now in total offense, so they can be extremely explosive. You have to have ways to handle it. And then their head coach, Kalen DeBoer, is very familiar with the Big Ten Conference, and he's also familiar with Jacoby Windman, coached against him when he was at UNLV and DeBoer was at Fresno State. So they might have a couple answers nobody else has had so far.
Yeah, better than 570 yards of offense. Kalen DeBoer, to your point, the former Indiana offensive coordinator before going to Fresno as a head coach. And it's an interesting game, right? First time that these two have played in the regular season since 1970. We mentioned Michael Penix's current team, his former team, Indiana, facing a high-powered attack as well in Western Kentucky.
Yeah, Indiana had a nice win last week. I don't know what the spread is, and I don't care. I'm going to call this game a trap game, okay? A trap game. I mean, they are playing a football team in Western Kentucky, Indiana is, that had a bye week to get ready for them. I mean, last year they were throwing 80% of the time, bunch of big numbers. Now they're more balanced. The key to this game for Indiana, last week, Sean Shivers, the transfer running back from Auburn. He had a nice day, 150-some yards. They ran the ball over 200 yards. That's the DNA for Tom Allen in Indiana to be successful. It's not throwing the ball 60 times. So the key is, will they be able to run the football against Western Kentucky?
Last 2 games between these two decided by a total of 5 points. So
there we go. See, I didn't even know that, but I was on it. Yeah.
It feels like it could be a really close one. Rutgers, meanwhile, trying to stay perfect. Temple, not a great team, but again, going on the road. What are you looking for?
Yeah, Temple got a new head coach in Stan Drayton, so they're still kind of
you're familiar with? Yes.
Figure their way out through this thing. They got a win a week ago. This is important for Rutgers because you go and you beat BC. That's a big game. And then, you get your bye game and you get to feel good about yourself. But now you have a chance to start 3-0. you need to be in this position, because then you start looking down the schedule. If your Rutgers, at where can we steal one? And you know, to your crossovers, you got Iowa, which is a big question mark right now. Probably going to be a lot of punts in that game. And then you've got Nebraska, which is another question mark. So if you start off giving yourself as much of a runway with your out of conference as possible, then you can start looking down that schedule and say, okay, we just got to get 3 more so we can get to a bowl game, and I think they can be in position to do that.
I love Greg Schiano. He's my guy. You know, you got the buses going down, tailgate. I'm buying pizzas. we're gonna have the Rutgers in full force in Temple. I love it.
Could be a big party too. Greg Schiano, with a win, would become the winningest coach in the history of Rutgers.
Break out the champagne
They're
bottles.
gonna get it.